Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something genuinely fascinating. We're looking at a highly successful individual who practically built an empire, but does it in an incredibly unusual work environment. You know, when we think of massive tech innovations, we usually picture these bustling Silicon Valley campuses, right? Open-plan offices, glass walls, endless high-energy collaborative meetings. But what if one of the absolute most critical pieces of software in modern history was born in a setting that's the exact opposite of all that?
Just listen to this quote. "My office is the most boring office you will ever see. I sit there alone in the quiet. I work alone in my house, often in my bathroom." Literally, his bathroom. Imagine a stark, completely silent workspace. There are no neon lights, no glass cabins, zero coworkers buzzing around. It's completely silent. This person explicitly chooses computers that make zero noise, no big, powerful, whirring desktop towers, just to maintain absolute quiet. They don't want any external stimulation whatsoever. So who works here? Is this just a quirky IT freelancer? Maybe someone who's just deeply unhappy?
Well, here's the kicker. That isolated, solitary, completely silent room, it birthed a creation of truly unimaginable scale. To put it in perspective, this quiet focus generated a staggering $31 billion in revenue and $22 billion in profit just for Google's Android alone. We're talking about the engine room of a global empire operating out of total, chosen silence.
And here's the man behind that silent room, Linus Torvalds. Yep, the creator of Linux. This is the revolutionary open-source software that, let's be real, essentially runs the modern internet, our smartphones, and countless servers worldwide. This reveals a massive truth for us. Extreme, isolated focus isn't a limitation for Torvalds at all. It is actually his ultimate tool for creation.
Okay, moving to Section 1, the birth of Linux. From puzzles to global code.
So born in Finland back in 1969 to journalist parents, Torvalds wasn't exactly your typical popular kid. He spent his childhood entirely absorbed in solving math and physics puzzles, just by himself. In fact, he was so incredibly introverted that when guests came over to his house, he'd actually rely on his siblings to screen them. He'd be like, "Who's out there? How do I greet them?" just to avoid any unnecessary face-to-face interaction. And you know, this carried right into adulthood. He didn't start Linux to build some massive corporation. He just wanted to solve problems and scratch his own programming itch. When he finally had this cool project, he open-sourced his computer code over email. Why? Because it let him share his work globally and collaborate with thousands of people, all while maintaining his physical distance and completely avoiding face-to-face meetings.
Now, you might be wondering, wait, corporations like Google are making billions off his unpaid open-source work. Doesn't that drive him crazy? Not even a little bit. Despite others making absolute fortunes from his code, Torvalds remains incredibly happy. By cutting out all the corporate noise, the pointless meetings, the external stimulation, he gets to stay right there in his isolated zone of focus. He isn't stressed out, he's entirely content, because at the end of the day, he's living life completely on his own terms.
All right, Section 2, the pianist who hated crowds, Glenn Gould's Echo.
Now, you might think this extreme need for isolated focus is just a quirky trait of tech geniuses, right? But let's look at the legendary pianist Glenn Gould. People literally said he created absolute magic on the piano, yet he had this intense, almost visceral aversion to live audiences. He said, "I detest audiences. I think they are a force of evil." He didn't just get stage fright, he actively despised the whole spectacle. To him, concert halls were basically just judgmental playgrounds where people just sat around waiting for him to make a mistake.
And that intense discomfort led to a pretty radical career shift. Despite being celebrated all over the globe, the discomfort just became way too much. So on April 10, 1964, at the incredibly young age of just 31, Gould abruptly quit live performances. Forever. From that day forward, he worked exclusively in closed, noise-free, completely private studios. If someone wanted a new note or a tweak in the music, he'd happily record it in his private, controlled environment, entirely eliminating the noise and the judgment of a crowd.
Let's dive into Section 3, Self-Determination Theory, the framework of chosen isolation.
So why does this intense isolation work so incredibly well for people like Torvalds and Gould? Well, it all comes down to self-determination theory, or SDT. It's a psychological framework that essentially says our motivation and our mental well-being rely on fulfilling three basic psychological needs. When these needs are met, we thrive, we create, and we find true happiness, even if our methods look a little, weird or antisocial to the outside world.
It's absolutely crucial to understand these three pillars. First up is autonomy. This is the need to have absolute control over your own choices and actions without feeling pressured by anybody else.
Second is competence, that fundamental human drive to feel capable, to handle tasks, and to just continuously build your skills. And third is connection, the need to feel securely linked to a community or your loved ones. For a person to reach their maximum potential and feel truly happy, all three of these pillars have to be in perfect balance.
A really great way to wrap your head around autonomy is looking at blood donation. It's fascinating. If you ask people to donate blood for free, participation is surprisingly high because it feels like a noble, independent choice. But the second you offer to pay them, say $100, participation actually plummets. Why? Because you've just stripped away their feeling of independent, voluntary choice. You've turned a personal, autonomous action into a mere transaction, totally destroying their sense of autonomy.
Which brings us to Section 4, the power of chosen solitude, applying SDT to your life. Have you ever felt incredibly guilty for just wanting to cancel your Friday night plans and stay home? We've all been there. Imagine this. Your friends drag you to a crowded cafe. The music is blaring, lights are flashing, everyone's laughing. But internally, you feel like your brain literally has 50 browser tabs open at once. You feel entirely drained because you've experienced a huge loss of control. Someone else is holding the remote control to your life in that moment. Now compare that to coming home early, sitting alone in the quiet, and suddenly feeling this massive burst of energy to work on a solo presentation late into the night.
Leaving that loud cafe early isn't a sign that you're sad or antisocial. Look at how perfectly this fulfills that STT balance. Leaving the party restores your need for autonomy. You are back in the driver's seat. Firing up your laptop to crush that late-night presentation, that satisfies your need for competence. You're building your skills. And then, around 1 a.m., when you feel a slight urge for human contact, sending a quick voice note to your best friend saying, "Hey, let's grab tea tomorrow," completely secures your need for connection. You just achieved perfect psychological balance entirely on your own terms. It's not running away, it's a strategic retreat.
Now, we do have to make a vital distinction here, and this is backed by a major 2020 study. Isolation itself is not fundamentally good or bad. It depends entirely on the context. Being forced into isolation, like when you desperately want to go out but you can't, is psychologically damaging. It creates stress, confusion, anger, mostly because it totally violates your autonomy. But chosen isolation, when you actively decide to shut the door, close out the noise, and focus like Linus Torvalds in his quiet room, that right there acts as an absolute superpower for achievement and profound personal growth.
So what you should really take away from this explainer is this. You need to stop feeling guilty for wanting to be alone. If you're naturally wired to thrive in quiet environments, just embrace it. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. How will you intentionally utilize your own chosen isolation this week to build your competence and achieve your goals? Embrace the quiet, protect your focus, and go build something absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.